lack of access to transportation, you have kids, you still don't qualify for those, prime hours that someone with experience with the company already has. And the wages have not increased very much at all, or I don't think they have increased much at all. And so I think a family of 4, the 2 adults in the household would have to work 3 full-time minimum wage jobs apiece in order to just meet their basic living expenses. And so if you think about it, like, how is that even possible when you take into, this need to spend time with your children? I mean, when is that ever going to happen?
Right. I've heard many people say that it would be easier just to give people money directly. I spoke a few months back with a historian and political theorist named Rutger Bregman, who is an advocate of a universal basic income. And there are others on the right who agree with this concept because they say it would actually save money in the long run to, rather than paying people to get dribs and drabs of aid, just eliminate the middleman, cut people a check. What's your thought about that?
Oh, I think that's a fantastic idea. I'm totally on board with the UBI, but I think that the assumption that poor people are kind of thieves and that they're just trying to steal taxpayers' money, we don't trust poor people's decision making, and so we don't want to give them money outright, even though food stamps does not cover toiletries or diapers or anything like that. And so there were months that I had $50 left, not only for spending money, but for toiletries. And that takes a lot out of you. And I would have given anything to just have a certain amount of months that I could depend on and budget for. Especially single parents, they don't always get child support. They don't always get the benefits that they need. And just having this universal amount that we all get, I think would alleviate a lot of stress on those people who are in the most dire forms of poverty, where they're donating blood plasma to get by.
All right. Well, if Charles Murray on the right and Rutger Bregman on the left can come to the same conclusion, it seems like maybe it's something that we should try out. Again, we're speaking with Stephanie Land, the author of Maid, Hard Work, Low Pay, and A Mother's Will to Survive. When you were cleaning these houses as a maid, what did you see there, and what did it tell you about the impact that the economic system that we have been discussing right now has on people who are doing relatively well, economically speaking?
Well, it seemed to me that my clients had living spaces that were not entirely used, and it also seemed like they weren't home very much, and I assumed that they were working a lot, and that didn't make sense to me, and I kind of felt for them, like, you have bought this house and you have filled it with all of these things and these recreational vehicles in your garage, but you're paying me to dust places and clean places that aren't even getting used, and yet you're still working hard to keep that up. And somehow there was a huge disconnect there for me. Why does it matter that you have all of these huge spaces in your house? Is it just for show, or is it is it a situation that you found yourself in that you're having a harder time affording now? And so I was really curious about that. And it was kind of like a step into this whole new world that for me meant nothing but rainbows and unicorns and happiness. And I'm kind of learning that that they are affected by the common cold, and the everyday ailments that I struggled with, affected people in these huge houses that, I imagined meant perfection and happiness and happily ever after.
These people don't seem particularly satisfied. It seems to me that you're creating a huge majoritarian mass of people on one side of the spectrum who are just struggling to get by and virtually on the edge at any point of falling into the precipice of economic doom. And on the other, a much smaller number of people who are reaping the rewards of the system, and yet they really don't even have the capacity, because they're just one human being, to absorb all of that. I mean, how big a house can you wander through? How many suits can you wear? And it would seem to me, and I know there's so many arguments that are made against this, and we need to incentivize people to achieve, and there's something to that. But when it ends up at a point where there is such an imbalance, I mean, how do we adjust a system like that? How do we go about changing that in a way that acknowledges what people have in their heads, and that so much of this is entrenched as a means of doing things and has been for such a long time?
Oh, I think visibility is key. You know, when I was on book tour for the last couple of weeks, I started kind of counting how many people were invisibly making my life easier. And it went from, you know, the person opening the door for me in the hotel, to the janitor in the airport changing the bag of trash, the cooks in the kitchen, the busboy. Like, you can go like on and on and on and on. But these people are hardly ever noticed or even looked at, or, you know, hardly ever make eye contact. And we don't remind ourselves that they're getting paid very little money. They probably have no benefits and are struggling to just get through the day and do that job and possibly go on to another one so that they can support their families. But their job is to make our lives easier. And I think that just illustrates that whole scenario that we're in, of like the separation of the two classes is getting bigger and bigger. And I think it's just because there's a huge disconnect between us and them, or, you know, between all of that, because we're not relating to each other as human beings, and we're not empathizing with each other.
Yeah. Some would say, well, you've managed to write this book. You subsequently took courses in creative writing. You have been in the national spotlight, and you've managed to overcome this. But I heard you discuss in another interview that you gave recently that you are still struggling, that you are still in debt, that you are in a place where you will have to be finding another living situation yourself. And I think, not that I want to focus on that in particular, in a way I do, because I think it reveals that the people that we assume should be in a very comfortable position, in a very secure position, are not necessarily so. And I think it's useful to talk about. What's your experience with achieving the level of notoriety that you have so far while still living a regular life?
Oh, it's crazy. But I mean, it's also, I am always in a position where I am kind of waiting for the rug to be pulled out from under me. Like, I really don't believe things until I see it. And, you know, even though the book is doing really well and everything is blowing up, like, that doesn't mean that I'm going to get like a lifetime of royalties that's going to buy me a house or anything. You know, I'm still going to be scrambling, and I'm still going to be working full time. Just right now, I'm given the opportunity to work full time on promoting a book, which is still kind of blowing my mind. But, you know, I think as you were talking, I was thinking about all of the people who were coming out with these stories of not being able to buy groceries after not getting 2 paychecks during the government shutdown. And we were all kind of surrounding these stories and comforting them and supporting them. But the real story here was that this is a government position, and these people don't have savings accounts. Like, they're still living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that's a huge part of, what we like to pretend is not there. We don't want to think about our neighbors struggling or our relatives struggling, because often we don't have the ability to help them. And so we just kind of assume that everybody's fine, because assuming that we need to help people is overwhelming. Like, what do you do? Like, do you order them pizza? And so I think the less that that we shame this narrative of struggling, like the less that that's a shameful thing to admit, then I would hope that we were able to come together in our own communities and support each other more.
I think that a lot of folks go around with the concept in their heads of, how much money somebody is supposed to make. And in a lot of cases, because it's not something that we talk about a lot. It's something that we're very uncomfortable talking about, because you're right, we do feel insecure. I mean, what would we do? There isn't too much that we could do. But we have maybe concepts from a generation ago about what people make or what people should make. And so when we see the numbers because of inflation or because of what's actually necessary to get by, that seems, oh gosh, that's too much. $15 an hour, that's not how much I grew up with. But it doesn't take current reality into account. And so maybe there should be some sort of national project where people just come out and in some public forum, and I know it's very difficult because people don't like to talk about it, and there's tremendous shame or guilt associated with the number, but just say, I make this much. I wish there was some way of discussing that in a way that we realized what that number was and what the significance of that was for both that individual and for the rest of society. I think having that conversation would be tremendously useful.
I agree. I work, my daytime job is a freelancer, and a lot of my colleagues and peers are women, and we're all in Facebook groups together, and we very openly tell each other how much we're getting paid per article. And a few of my friends have even posted it on Twitter, like how much they're getting paid from publications like The Atlantic or the New York Times. And it's really not that much. And I, if I'm ever counseling someone in how to pitch editors and how to get started, I tell them every single pitch, if you get an amount originally that they offer, come back and say, can you do better? Is there more room in your budget to do this? And most often they will offer more money.
That's right.
And it's because I know how much this person made, and so I know that they're able to pay that much, and so I can ask them for more money. And I think it's situations like that where, there are people in the same position who are getting paid a lot less for some reason, and most often it's because they don't know that the other person is getting paid more, and they don't know that they can ask, and they're afraid they'll get fired or they'll be a nuisance or, not get a bonus next time around. We're kind of punished for asking for our time to be worthwhile. And when really our time is very worthwhile, and we should get paid a living wage.
It's a mantra that we all need to repeat to ourselves, or a bumper sticker that we need to put on the back of our cars. Ask for more. I think it's important to do that in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different situations. We've been speaking with Stephanie Land. She is the author of Maid, Hard Work, Low Pay, and A Mother's Will to Survive. Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.